Hi, I'm Shelley Wood, the Managing Editor at TCTMD. This is a virtual edition of On Record, a regular program looking at topical issues in interventional cardiology and beyond. Our topic today is COVID-19, and my four guests have all contracted the virus themselves and recovered. Hi, everyone. Thanks for doing this. I know you guys are all so busy, so stepping away from patient care to tell us a bit about this is really important, so thank you. Gennaro, I wanted to start with you. You guys have all come down with COVID-19. You've all recovered, and that's what we're here to talk about today. Do you mind just telling us when you discovered that you had caught the virus and what your symptoms were?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Shelley, for having me. So actually, I got infected very early in the process when the whole pandemic started here in New York City. It was around 5-6 weeks ago. We were a group of fellows, that first two fellows that we were working together that in the same rotation got infected. Two of them developed high-grade fevers. They got tested. They were positive. And then around 5 days after, I started developing symptoms. I started having low-grade fevers, myalgias. So basically, I was sent home. I was not tested. I was assumed to be positive. And after me, two more fellows that we were together started having same symptoms, including high-grade fevers. And then I basically was sent isolation at home. And my symptoms basically were low-grade fevers, very bad myalgias, headache. After 2 days, I started developing anosmia, analgesia, and then basically after 3 days, I stopped having low-grade fevers, and the myalgia slowly improved. And then my hospital wanted me to come back to work 7 days after resolution of symptoms. And since then, I've been doing pretty well.
Isaac, I know because you've talked about this with others that you had a pretty similar course, but did that sound about right for you, or tell us about your symptoms?
Yeah, I was very early. This was in the first part of March. And so this was kind of on the height of early expectations and reports coming out of China and around the world. We had just had a few cases in New York, and I think we had maybe 1 or 2 people in the hospital. I started feeling ill on Sunday night, honestly, and I felt like something was a little different. And then Monday, it continued to get worse, meaning fevers, just malaise. And then Monday night, I actually ended up sleeping on the couch just because I thought, what if this really is something like COVID? And if it gets better, it gets better. If it doesn't, then I know that this is something worse. And it ended up getting worse. So I had fevers Tuesday, and all through Tuesday, I just felt really just terrible. I felt malaise. I had myalgias. I had headaches, and I don't really get headaches. And I thought that was very unusual. I ended up getting tested on Tuesday. And then that Tuesday, I moved out just out of precaution. I was very lucky. Again, I had an apartment that my in-laws had in the city that was vacant. No, they were not there. And so I went there and I just basically convalesced for 7 days. I slept. I didn't really have internet access. I was kind of alone, and I didn't really feel well. So it didn't really matter. I just kind of looked out the window and hung out. And I had some mild GI distress, but it was really myalgias and headaches. And eventually that got better. I moved back after a week. I got the test back after 4 to 5 days, so it all made sense. I really felt fully normal at about 2 weeks, so about 14 days. And that's the time that I also went back to work. I've been running a couple of times, and even though I constitutionally feel well, I certainly feel a little more short of breath. My exercise tolerance isn't normal.
Right. Yeah. Jordan, you also were struck quite early on in the process, weren't you? I remember hearing about it on Twitter really early on. It seemed it.
Yeah, I think I was the beginning of the second week in March. And like these guys, my symptoms started, I remember thinking like, I must have allergies. It's allergy season. And I had some, things that were typically not associated with it. Stuffy nose, head congestion. And then I developed pretty significant GI symptoms. Once again, not really concerned that I was COVID positive. I also hadn't really reached sort of critical mass yet here in New Jersey. And then I think on a Sunday night, I literally could not taste or smell anything. Like you could put anything in front of me and I could not identify a taste or a smell. And that Sunday night, so then Monday morning, I started looking on Twitter and seeing if anosmia and ageusia was listed as symptom. And all of a sudden there was like 1,000 tweets from South Korea and Italy. And so I went to get tested, and sure enough, I was positive. And then, you know, my symptom course was, I think it was pretty benign comparatively. Obviously, we're all working in the hospital. We see the non-benign courses, but I did have low-grade temps, but I had never had a cough.
Actually, none of you have mentioned cough, actually.
I did not have a cough either. No.
Yeah, I never had a cough. I did have what Isaac described, which was I was going to bed at like 7:30, and really because I wanted to. I had profound fatigue and weakness, and that was really, as it tailed on, that was really the longest lasting symptom. Some myalgia's in there too, but the fatigue and sort of just, I had no exercise tolerance. We have a Peloton. I always every day I would sort of get on to see where I was if I felt like I could, like once I started convalescing.
Yeah.
And slowly but surely I could get myself back up to close to where I thought I was or should be. But it took a while, and I'd say 2 weeks was about it. But really my course was significantly more benign than a lot that I've heard of.
Yeah. Azeem, I want to hear from you too. And I also, because we had a bit of email back and forth about this, one of the things I'd love to ask you all, and this would be a great place to start, would be about protecting those around you. Because I think that's been, you know, Isaac talked about moving to another apartment, but you happened to mention to me that your whole family actually got struck by the virus. Tell us about the symptoms for this family, and do you happen to know, was that because of you, or do you know how your family got sick?
Sure. Thanks for the opportunity to share this. So it looks like I'm the sort of out of the group here, the last one to get infected, because today is my first day back at work.
Wow.
I got sick about 3 weeks ago, and it was kind of a Monday. We were full in the epidemic, lots of patients in the hospital, but also already quite a few staff members who had gotten sick and were out because they were sick. And I remember just coming down with sort of flu-like symptoms, just feeling like I was getting a flu. And I was pretty sure it was going to be COVID. And then got myalgias, a really high fever, above 100, headaches, and some GI symptoms similar to Jordan, with really bad diarrhea. And then my course seemed to take very similar course to what everybody describes, in the sense, I started getting better, myalgia started going away, the fever came down, and at about day 7, I thought I was out of it. I felt so much better, and I thought in a few days I'd be able to start work. Unfortunately, in about day 8, day 9, from when my symptoms started, is when I suddenly became short of breath. I started coughing, I became hypoxic. I was checking my saturations at home, and they dropped to 94% on room air, and I couldn't walk up the steps because I was so short of breath. And that was really scary, just from feeling great one day to the next day, having this severe cough, some chest pain as well, and shortness of breath. And how rapid it was is what was dramatic. How you can go from one day feeling fine to the next day feeling short of breath. Now, this has kind of been typical, described with this virus, is that on day 8 and day 9, between day 8 to day 10 is when people can get hypoxic and start deteriorating. And at that stage, I got pretty scared. I thought, would I end up now in hospital? Would I end up requiring, any sort of respiratory or ventilatory support? I, at that stage, stayed at home. I was checking my saturations every sort of 3-4 hours to make sure it didn't drop. I spent a lot of time prone because a lot of my colleagues and a lot of the data showed that actually lying on your tummy can help your lungs and help your breathing. And it actually helped a lot. So I would spend most of the day lying on my tummy and trying to just relax, being on my tummy and trying to breathe. And it slowly got better. It took a long time to get better. it took probably about another week. I was hypoxic for about a week, where my sets were around 94, 95 on room air. They would drop a little more if I walked. I got to tell you, I had a lot of support from friends. I had Isaac and Sushil and RJ calling me every day and texting me, Juan Granada as well. All were really worried about whether I would need to be admitted, and that helped a lot, was having a lot of support in case I would get sicker. And then eventually got better. But I guess what was dramatic is, even a couple of days before I got sick, I started getting worried about my family and about infecting them. So I moved out of my bedroom into a guest bedroom about 1 or 2 days before I got sick. It seemed though that I didn't move out soon enough, because even though I moved into a guest bedroom, it all depends on kind of what your home's like. A lot of people tell me they moved into the garage, or they changed in the garage before coming into the house. We didn't have that ability to do that. So I would, in order to be able to get to the guest bedroom, have to walk through the house and get to the guest bedroom before I could change and have a shower. And I thought I was being pretty careful, because I think the biggest fear for those of us who are healthcare workers is bringing this home to your family. And I thought I was pretty careful, but 5 days after I got sick, my oldest daughter got sick, and she got a fever and myalgias. Fortunately, the young bounced back very quickly. Just as she started getting better, then my wife got sick. And similar symptoms to what Jordan and Gennaro described, with fever, myalgias, loss of smell, and loss of taste. And then my youngest daughter got sick. So in the end, all four of us at one stage were sick with COVID at home. Fortunately, the kids bounced back really quickly. Me and my wife are getting better. I've been cleared by occupational health to come back to work. I still have a little bit of a cough. I'd love to get a CAT scan to see what my lungs look like. I'm terrified to see what they might look like, but at some stage I want to get a CAT scan and see if I have any real damage to my lungs, because 3 weeks later, I'm still a little short of breath. I haven't gotten back to my normal exercise tolerance.
Yeah, that's scary. Anyone else take particular measures to try to, protect colleagues, protect family? I mean, we were, at the time all of you were infected, it was a stage where we were all just learning about the infectious period and how long to quarantine. But anyone else got any anecdotes along those lines?
I mean, I took a bunch of homeopathic vitamins and things like that, and I don't know if that really helped or not, but I was watching a lot of Dr. Oz and Dr. Phil, so. Right.
I do think that all of our kind of adherence to best clinical evidence, as soon as you're sick or you think you're getting sick, I do it with a common cold. I go, well, I'm going to have some vitamin C here now. But I think we do put our faith in some of those things more than we would otherwise. Jordan, you were going to say?
Well, like Azeem, my whole family got it. My wife's a pediatrician.
Okay.
She was positive. My 14-year-old son was positive. We didn't even test my other 2 kids because they were positive. I mean,
right.
We early on in my course, I had symptoms for almost 3 days before I was tested, and the test didn't come back for 2 days. So I had been living with my wife, and we know now probably that you're shedding before you're symptomatic.
Yeah.
And we met with a couple of infectious disease colleagues that I know and trust, and they said you have to weigh the pros and cons of segregating from your family. The likelihood is that you've already given it to them anyway. My wife is a very smart person, smarter than I am, and we all agreed that probably segregation at this point was unnecessarily hard on the family.
Sure.
We don't necessarily have a place where we can easily segregate from each other. So I think it was sort of a foregone conclusion that we would all have it. And like Azeem said, the kids had a very mild course. They all had sort of low-grade temps and felt blah, but that was really the extent of it. My wife, who's an asthmatic, had a couple of nights that definitely made me not sleep. And, I was sitting up in the bed listening to her as she slept, and we have a pulse ox that I bought at CVS as soon as I got sick, and wow. I would put it on her finger periodically while she was sleeping and while she was awake and check temps. And I mean, what, Azeem's course was, I think the hardest part of this whole thing for me was not knowing which direction it would take. Like when I first said, oh, I have a positive result, I was pretty cavalier about it. And then I was like, Jesus, like, I started reading on Twitter, and they were like, oh yeah, anosmia, it's a very benign course. I was like, yes. And then the next tweet was, oh, anosmia, well, that's the heralding sign of a much worse course a week later. And so I was freaking out. I was like, I can't do this anymore. So it was the fear of progression. I think that was the worst part of it for me, and fearing for my wife and family, obviously. Now that time has gone by, I can look back on it and say, geez, I was lucky and it wasn't that bad. But
I'm guessing you all are doing that, actually. Azeem, even with your really difficult course. But, I have opened the door now. I'm sorry in some ways, because we can't keep talking. You guys have to get back to work. And I feel like now everybody who wants to know more is going to be emailing you personally to get those details. So my apologies. But rather than ask you all the other 10 questions I felt like asking, I wonder if maybe the best thing to do would be for you guys to tell your colleagues, it's largely a cardiology audience that watches TCTMD. Is there anything that you learned because you actually spent some time as a patient, not as a physician, that would help potentially protect your colleagues or potentially vulnerable patients? Any messages in here? I mean, like Jordan, we're all spending way too much time on Twitter or reading the news and sort of worried about the worst case scenario. But from your experience, anything you'd like to use this platform to tell your physician colleagues about? Let's start with you, Gennaro.
Yeah, no, I think this has been actually a very important lesson for me in general, because I haven't always paid a lot of attention to the use of PPE, and I got infected in a moment where there was not so much awareness about the disease. I remember I was on call the weekend that we diagnosed the first case of COVID at Mount Sinai. So this was like early March, really. And I was like coming in and out of the emergency room and going around the hospital without like any protection, like at all. And I think using PPE and know how to use PPE is actually extremely important. Right now, I'm paying a lot of attention, and I am educating other people as well about the importance and the use of it. So I think that for me has been the most important lesson about this.
Yeah. Isaac?
Gennaro's points are excellent. I think we all take all of our usual routines for granted, and they're not necessarily hygienic or sanitary. So I think keeping that in mind and really keeping our practices up to date is really important. I think the experience is interesting because it brings us a lot closer to people in other parts of the hospital that we don't appreciate. I mean, we see what happens if you don't take out the trash once a day, and if you don't get things clean, and you see the value of all the things that we take for granted. There's so many things we take for granted. Keeping a hospital clean, our hospital workers that clean the operating rooms, clean the ICUs. I mean, that's the fundamental foundation of how we treat things in the hospital and keep infections treated. So they have become part of our life now, and we understand and appreciate them so more. So I have a great understanding of how a lot of the people that we take for granted are so important.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that. There's been, doctors are getting a lot of hero hashtags, and God knows I admire all of you so much, but I do think it's some of the unseen people that have been as much a part of this who might get forgotten in that. So I'm glad you raised it. Azeem.
I mean, I guess I can't highlight enough the PPE, but also it looks like in New York, maybe we're flattening the curve and there may be light at the end of this tunnel. I honestly think one of the things that led to a lot of me and my colleagues being infected early on was the fact that we were not wearing universal masks. There wasn't this policy of universal masks. And I just think it's really important that even going forward, even when this pandemic starts decreasing, that we unfortunately all going to have to wear a mask all the time. I probably got infected, if not from a patient, from a staff member who was shedding and was not symptomatic. So I think, that's important to realize. I think the other thing maybe I'd highlight is As doctors, we always, in this pandemic, we want to be in the front line and we want to be fighting. And for me, it was really difficult being a patient for a while and not being able to help my colleagues and being in the front lines. One of the things I learned, though, that I think people are realizing, and I want to reiterate, is that this is not the flu virus. I was doing well, and I felt like I was having the same course as everybody else here on this call. And then suddenly in 24 hours, I was hypoxic and I couldn't walk and I was short of breath, right? So my advice to my colleagues out there is to please, take your time, make sure you are better before you go back to work, and really take care of yourself. It takes a while to get over this virus. It's not the flu.
Okay, thank you. Jordan.
I think the one thing that I'll take maybe from the whole experience, and I don't necessarily think that this is advice to my colleagues, this is just the one thing that I've taken from this, is we really have no idea who has it. I mean, we've seen so much data come out about how many people are asymptomatic. And, I see now I'm back at work and I'm working on COVID units, and the patients look scary on 100 drips and they're ventilated, and that it's a long course for them. And those are scary patients. But, my 14-year-old son poses a lot more of a significant threat to people than those patients who are sequestered in the hospital. I mean, he's able-bodied and looks very healthy. And for a good period of time, he was shedding and can pose a very significant threat to a large number of people if he's not made aware and we don't educate him, and if other people treat him like a normal, healthy person. They don't know. We don't know who has it. That study from Columbia surveying pregnant women coming in for delivery was, 15% of the women surveyed just because they were coming in for delivery were COVID positive. And of that group, almost 90% had no symptoms.
Yeah.
And they're talking to people, and a transporter is taking them somewhere. And then he goes back and he talks to the transporters. And it is, it's the asymptomatic population that poses such a threat. So we don't know who has it. That's you can't just look at someone and make a clinical diagnosis all the time of coronavirus. And so that's the one thing that I've taken from this. And that's why it's so scary to me, that it can affect some people so dramatically and some people not at all. And we really don't know why that is yet. So that and the ancillary staff in the hospital are just amazing. I mean, the nurses who were repurposed from cardiac nursing to floor nursing, and the CNAs who are young and just going into those rooms and gearing up in the PPE, and the radiology techs and the respiratory therapists, they're just amazing. I mean, it's honestly, it's put our hospital system to the ultimate test. And I feel like when I walk around, I'm just so proud of those people and everything they do. They're just awesome people. And I'm so proud to be a healthcare worker at this time.
Yeah, there's been so much sorrow and so much carnage that's come out of this, but there has been so many stories like the one you raised now that really is a reminder of the good that could potentially come out of this, potentially. I have to cap it here. Thank you guys so much for telling me a bit about this. I really appreciate it. I'm sure you're tired of answering these kind of questions, but for those of us who have not been through what you've been through, it's great to get some insight. So thank you all. Take care.
Thanks, Shelley.
Thanks, Shelley.
And thanks all of you for watching On Record.